Well, you can ruin your reputation with bad automation. You can ruin your reputation through automation, LinkedIn, email, voice automation. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. If you don't have the right strategy for it, then you might burn down more bridges and picking up that one win along the way. So it's really important to kind of start with that first. What's the outcome I'm after? What's the strategy? And then get really, really clean stuff from there to help you just move faster.
Hi, I'm Kortney Harmon, Director of Industry Relations at Crelate. This is the Full Desk Experience's Industry Spotlight Series. Welcome to another episode of the Full Desk Experience Industry Spotlight. Today, we have a very special guest, Donnie Gupton. He's the founder of the Relevant Recruiter Method. Donnie is a marketing and lead generation specialist who has helped numerous recruiting, staffing, executive search firms really streamline their processes, generate inbound leads, and really position themselves as the go-to authorities in their respective markets. In this episode, we'll be diving deep into Donnie's innovative approach, which really promises to revolutionize the way recruiters and business developers conduct their business. So we'll explore some limitations. We're going to learn how Donnie leverages his systems and talks about automating, content marketing, digital presence, and really creates a consistently filled pipeline for prospects. So get ready to take notes as we uncover the secrets behind Donnie, his Relevant Recruiter Method, and how you can transform your recruiting business. So let's dive in. Donnie, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kortney. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate that wonderful intro. And yeah, I'm excited to drive some value. Hopefully everyone walks away with a little nugget here today.
I love it. It's all it takes is one or two.
Yep.
So do me a favor. Could you tell us a bit more about your background and how you really got into the recruiting, staffing and recruiting industry in general?
Yeah, I always love this question. So I think like a lot of folks, I didn't go to college to become a recruiter. I didn't go to college to be a part of the recruiting industry in general. And in fact, I've never even owned or been a recruiter myself. I actually completely stumbled into this industry as a marketing, business development kind of an expert. And so little short history, I helped grow my dad's floor covering company. We were partners for, retail kind of construction flooring business in the Bay Area. And back in 2007, 2008, when the economy started to crash, we were fully invested into the Yellow Pages, like $3,500 a month, Yellow Pages. We wanted to be number one, and nobody was opening up the Yellow Pages. Coincidentally, during that time, this was when social media started to kind of pop up. So we didn't have money to invest into our business because we were kind of trying to survive as a small business at that time. And so it was all effort. So that's when YouTube and all these things, long story short, started following this guy. His name is Gary V. If anybody's ever heard of Gary Vaynerchuk before he was Gary Vaynerchuk, he had Wine Library TV. Check it out. It's awesome. So he was reviewing wines for his parents' wine, store. And so I just started doing the same concept for my dad's floor covering store. And we grew that business from under $1 million to over $6 million in a 3-year span. And it was all through digital. So that's where I was like, all right, I've got some skills. I've got some, stuff, but I really didn't want to be running that business anymore. So, I went out on my own. I wanted to coach. I found a person, I'm giving you the cliff notes now, in the staffing industry. We saw some really great results together. She was a direct hire recruiter, actually, in the nurse practitioner space. And so we started running some campaigns, and that's when I really just learned and built the Relevant Recruiter Method through helping people, in these strategies through time. So that was 6 years ago now. Yeah.
And the rest is history. You're loving every minute of the world, right?
Oh, I love this. I love the space. I think that, one of the things about the recruiting industry is not a single day is the same. You get to deal with a lot of, excellent people. And by extension, with me empowering, and helping people elevate their brands, by extension, I get to help people find, excellent career opportunities and help companies find excellent talent. So yeah, I love the role that I get to play, and I really kind of stay right in my specific zone.
I love that. So you've obviously seen some different perspectives across our industry, and especially focusing on business development. I know kind of heard you earlier make the comment on another call, business development. Some people think it's optional. So that might play into this, but could you share your perspective on maybe some common challenges our business development teams and staffing and recruiting really face when trying to find new clients in today's market?
Well, I think if you look at where we're at right now, and this isn't universally true, but with a lot of recruiters I'm speaking with, is there's just less than what there was a couple of years ago. Less job orders, less opportunities for them to go, sell for, so to speak. And so I think that's one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that you're dealing with a very, very kind of saturated, very competitive market. So knowing that, then the traditional tactics probably aren't going to work as well as they normally did, because when the economy shrinks and when there's less opportunities, then everybody becomes a business developer. And so I think one of the common things that happen is that, recruiting agencies are usually really good at that recruiting function, right? Of doing, delivering talent. And then what happens is they get really, really busy. They get a bunch of orders on their plate, and then they completely stop business development. And sometimes people get legacy clients that can support them for years. Right. And then all of a sudden the economy tweaks like it just did, we're going through right now. And again, I know some industries more than others.
Yeah.
And then they're stuck back at square one. And it's like, well, what do I do? And then they try to go do what they did 5 years ago, which was pick up the phone and cold call or mass email. And then it's like, oh, well, that doesn't work. And so now we're kind of out of touch. So I think a lot of it actually sometimes just come with having a very simple system that you can follow. Right. And a lot of recruiting agencies that I see that I end up helping is they're just kind of chasing different tactics, chasing the next shiny object. But it kind of brings back into what you started off the question with is it's always kind of, it's in some businesses, it becomes an option, right? And more marketing than business development is like, for whatever reason in the staffing recruiting industry is like, oh, well, I don't need to have a marketing plan. But we were kind of joking. It's like, well, no SaaS company ever came out and said, well, I don't need to have a marketing and business development plan. For whatever reason, recruiting just seems to be a little bit behind the times where some of these things are, viewed as being optional. But yeah, I know that's a long-winded answer to, what is the challenge? A lot of it is just lack of strategy. And sometimes we get ourselves, because we're good at what we do, it actually can hurt us sometimes with business development.
Yeah, we often put blinders on, especially, I know you and I were both athletes, so I think of like muscle memory, something we haven't had to do for a while. So therefore that muscle is not up to par. And then we tweak how we're using that muscle. And it's like, oh crap, I'm really out of shape. It's kind of like that same concept. And I think that's where a lot of our markets are today. So I love that answer. I think it's very insightful and absolutely across the board probably at this moment.
Yeah, totally.
So talk to me about your relevant recruiter method. What really inspired you to develop this? Obviously, you watch Gary Vee. Why the recruiting industry, and what core principles are really behind this method? Talk to me a little bit more about that.
So, it was inspired just based off of like what I saw as market need. When I first, it's funny, when I was on the floor covering company with my dad, we never were approached by recruiters or staffing agencies. We were a small company. So it was like, it was never a part of my world. Well, once I got exposed to the world, then I saw that everything, and again, this was about 6 years ago, but I saw that everything was kind of still very manual. Everything was one-to-one, in terms of the effort. And most of it was still on the cold call. And so for me, it was like, I just knew for myself, like I would never make a cold call in my life. Right now, I want to be clear. It's like, of course, if you're recruiting, it's any and all means necessary. But if you're on business development side and all you're doing is cold calling, I can tell you there's a lot better ways now in 2024 to generate some clients. Now, it's not to say to not be on the phone. There's just better ways to get to the phone, right? So when we look at the relevant recruiter method, what we really looked at is first challenge that we see with a lot of recruiting agencies is they just get caught in the noise. They're not differentiated. They don't know how to differentiate themselves. But even if they are different, their differentiator is not driving phone calls for them. So there's a lot of people, that are actually really good, that have repeat business, legacy clients, but don't know how to leverage that to turn that into new business from cold prospects. And so that's one of the first things that we help people do is really truly stand out and differentiate in the marketplace. And that's what really drives, good, thoughtful brand awareness to your market. But ultimately, for those that are looking for more exclusive, retained, contingent type opportunities, is being able to position yourself as being different than the next recruiter. And so for me, I really like to work with recruiters that aren't as transactionally focused as they are trying to be more partner focused in the business, because my goal is not to just help drive job orders, but to actually drive revenue. And I feel like that comes from a better relationship with the hiring leaders. And when you're talking about standing out, I think one of the things that a lot of recruiters forget is like there's almost another recruiter on every corner. It's like almost like a supermarket, right? And so, we were talking about this beforehand, but it's like the recruiting industry doesn't have the best overall reputation. So if you're kind of standing in that same group and you're not trying to change or drive a different narrative, then whatever the previous person's previous experience was with the recruiter is what they're naturally going to put you, into that same bucket. So standing out's the first thing. The next thing that we really focus on is, a more leveraged, pipeline build. And so this is where we really turn LinkedIn into a lead machine. And so our first objective is to strategically grow somebody's LinkedIn network with prospective hiring leaders. And for me, it's not as much HR. I'm not saying that that's not there's some paths that's the way in, but for me, we're usually looking at, for example, if it's accounting and finance, we're going after CFOs and controllers. We're going after the people that are feeling the pain of that open position. And that's one of the things that we really try to do with our positioning, getting somebody to stand out, is to help them stand out and position themselves as a problem solver for the hiring leaders, challenge. And so the LinkedIn lead machine is us just, solving the challenge of obscurity, whereas there's just, for a lot of small businesses, there's just not enough people that know that we exist to be able to help and support them. So with that, we're going to grow our network, but this is where the game gets really tricky. And this is where a lot of people have experienced stuff on LinkedIn that makes them cringe and like, I don't want to do that. Right. So we don't connect and pitch all day long, right? So we're not going to connect with our audience. We're not going to share our best unique selling proposition with our connections right away. Why? Because nobody signed up to LinkedIn to do that. Right now, I will tell you that we leverage automation all day long. We do it very effectively, and we've got great approaches that are more based off of building a relationship and more, client or candidate centric on the outreach, which creates great responses. And so that's a key component, is turning LinkedIn into a lead machine and leveraging LinkedIn, not using kind of the old school ways of just straight up sending in mails, which you have one shot, one kill. If you don't get it, you're done. Well, now the new strategy is grow your network so I can send multiple, messages, because people are busy and we need to be able to capture their attention, and follow up is a big part of that. And that's what the system allows for, which then brings us into what we call the content conversion system. Now, the great thing I think about LinkedIn that's really unique is you can actually strategically kind of build an audience of people that you want to reach out and prospect to, which we just discussed, but also that can consume your content. So when you get into this whole buzzword of like, I think everybody knows now is like, you got to have a presence, you got to create a little bit of content, but then where do I start? Who am I creating content? What does good content look like? But the thing that I think is still most overlooked is like, if you create content, you don't have an audience, you basically have an audience of one. You're going to be reading your own stuff and watching your own stuff. And so you want to be able to build an audience strategically. And that's where these two steps kind of come into play, is we build an audience. Well, now we're going to create content specific for that audience. So we've built this into 3 pillars. And the first pillar is what we call leadership. And the leadership pillar is where you really want to just, showcase to your audience that their pains, problems, frustrations, mistakes, of what's going on with their hiring efforts right now. And in this pillar, you want to really establish yourself as being the leader to solve those problems and be the ultimate solution to solve those problems. Now, one of the things that you want to really establish here, and this is, I can't drive this part home enough, is if you just start creating content, our ego tells us that everyone should listen, right? I've got a lot of good things to say. I think we all feel this way. And so, but the bottom line is you have to give thought into what your audience is experiencing. And the first thing that your audience wants to know is like, well, Kortney, why should I stop scrolling the feed and listen to you? And the ultimate thing that solves that and answers that question is your track record. And that's where, because I've done it, and I've done it several times over. And so sharing case studies and testimonials and things like that, not from like a bragging standpoint, but like I have to drive this narrative that I am successful in what I'm doing and I know what I'm doing. And if we're not lying to each other here, everybody wants to work with somebody who's winning and is successful, right? And so I know I'm winded, but I'm going to wrap this thing up with this for you here, Kortney. So the next 2 pillars in the content are service. So, how can you add value to your market? What are the tips, the tricks, the how-tos, busting myths and things like that. And then the third content pillar that we work on is connection. And I think especially on LinkedIn, everyone shies away at this, but it's like, Kortney, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? What are your beliefs? I want to know that you were a former D1 softball player, right? I want to know about your family. I want to know about your husband. I want to know about your kids. Like, what are you guys doing now? don't get this wrong. I'm not saying we're Instagram influencers snapping photos of every meal and posting that on there. But where you can, throw in a little bit of flavor, because that builds human connection. And in 2024, at least I'll speak for myself, like I love authentic things. I love things that are real. There's Chat GPT, there's AI, there's all these things out there. And so a lot of times people will create content for a long time, but never actually connect with their audience, and then never see the full benefit of it because that people don't know who they are necessarily. So that's what we've developed, that helps really drive the inbound lead. And then from there, we show up on multiple channels and continue to share that message.
I love it. I love so many things about everything that you just said. As recruiters and professionals in this industry, it's really easy to get caught up in the important versus the urgent, or the urgent versus the important. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. But we come in and we fight fires every day. And honestly, marketing's put on the back burner, business development's put on the back burner. In my training days, we always used to say proactive call block a day keeps the doctor away, kind of same poverty away in that terms. But it's easier said than done if you don't plan for it. And I love that it's a thought, it's a plan. And honestly, AI, as much as it's a great thing, I spoke last week at the Massachusetts Staffing Conference, and I was like, I really challenge everyone to make engagement the word of 2024. I don't know about you as an athlete, but I know me, whenever I was in sports, I always had a word of the year, a word to break my focus, a word to get re-engaged. And engagement is the word for me for this year. Be authentic. And I love the fact that I know that you played football, and knowing what your kids do, and your daughter runs track and competitive cheerleading. Those are the things that make relationships. And oftentimes we don't have time for those. So we just hurry up and we're like, well, I don't have anything to talk to them about. Let's move on to the next. Yeah. And that's where you're losing. That's where you're losing business.
Yeah, it's so funny because everyone has a story, especially about personal stuff, right? Especially on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, you don't share that there, who wrote the rule book is what I want to know. Like, there is no rule book out there. So create your own, right? And the more you start to look at the platform on like, oh, well, you have to behave this way on this platform and behave this way on that platform. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be strategic and be aware, but the bottom line is each platform is to drive your brand. Part of my brand is who I am as a person. And I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had where people can come in and it's like the most natural rapport building that there's ever been, where it's like, hey, I saw this. Hey, you do that. Hey, you do this. And it's like, there's already a connection, like where the awkwardness of that phone call is kind of gone. It's like, all right, let's dive in now. We can talk about the real stuff. So yeah. I think it's a great way to really differentiate yourself from somebody else. Because one of our biggest differentiators, especially in recruiting, is the people. Right. Absolutely. And when I was I hosted a panel a couple months back, and it was really interesting listening. And there was a panel full of hiring leaders. So, who the recruiters want to work with. And one of the things that they said is, one of the things we're noticing now is how recruiting firms that are starting to brand some of their recruiters, like they're having more connection with them, because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, there's ABC search firm, but these hiring managers now know that Kortney is going to be the one doing the search, and they want to know a little bit about Kortney, who's doing the search. And this is where modern companies are really starting to adopt not just their company brand, but the individual personal brands within their recruiting team as well.
I love that. Such a big play. You talked about LinkedIn and cold calling, so I'm going to go down that road right now. A lot of recruiting agencies, staffing firms really rely heavily on LinkedIn outreach, those in-mails, or cold calling as their primary sourcing and BD developments, right? Mm-hmm. So talk to me about what limitations that those transactional tactics how can they evolve, and how could that hinder their approach?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, like I said earlier, I think any approach can ultimately, can work. I think it's pick what you want to do, right? And like I said, I would never pick up and I would never have a cold calling strategy because that's just who I am. That's not to say that cold calling doesn't work. But I think if you were reading the writing on the wall, like everything that takes to do a cold call now in 2024, well, it's challenging to get the right data. Even though there's more data now than there has ever been, it's just getting the right data. And then second, how many other people have already pummeled that prospect with that same cold call? But third, and I think this is the thing that, the biggest thing to take away from here is when I'm constantly playing the chase game, then I've now immediately positioned myself as being an order taker. And there's probably a very, very small handful of people that can take a a chase if I'm going to cold call, flip the script on that and become the authority on the call. Those two things just don't typically align when like, I'm going to run after you, but I'm also going to tell you I'm, the best in the game doing this, where it's like, hey, if I can flip that into attracting you, then there's a little bit more belief in that type of a system. So I think the biggest thing for me with all of the outbound, doesn't matter if it's cold calling, emailing, LinkedIn, is sometimes you get put into this category of somebody who's desperate for business. Right. And I'm not saying that that's all the time, but I think that's one of the bigger challenges with it is, when you get in the technical part, you got 15 different voicemail boxes you need to hop through to get to, the hiring person. I think on the recruiting side, it's a little bit easier if you can get somebody's personal information. But on the business, if we're just staying kind of on the BD side, I think it's just all those hoops and all the buttons you have to push. But then you're just kind of putting yourself into like, now you're an order taker. And I think for me, that's the big thing that I want to flip the position of like, no, I'm an advisor, I'm an authority, I'm the relevant recruiter in your marketplace, right? So that's what I'm after more, is like less transactional approach.
I love it. I think it's important. You mentioned standing out from competition a few times. How do you go about standing out from competitors, establishing a strong brand presence? And the way you're talking and the way I've seen, it's crucial for recruiting firms. So talk to me about some strategies agencies can implement, maybe to position themselves as that authority in their niche industry. They can say it all they want, but having a strategy is really important, a playbook.
So I think the first thing, and this is one that I think is always a challenge for recruiters, because most recruiters are good at recruiting. And so then they're like, well, I can fill that position. I can fill that position. I can fill that position for that company and that company over there. But when you flip it the other way, it's, how do I become attractive to that company? Well, if I were a Fortune 100 company going through hiring challenges, that's a heck of a lot different than what that medium-sized company in your neighborhood that has one person in HR and what they're going through in hiring challenges. They both have the same need for that IT professional, for example, but what they're experiencing is completely different. And so my ability to articulate that I understand your day in hell and what your day in heaven should look like better than you do is now how I can really kind of start to stand out in the marketplace. So the first key component is actually like, what is your core customer? And believe it or not, that is something that is so far overlooked in this space because everybody is talent focused first. With business development, you have to be company focused first. What's their size? What's their pain? What's their frustration? What's the typical organization, org structure? Then from there, then I can start to go, okay, well, what are they experiencing with pain points versus this, right? So like a big Fortune 100 might have a big, robust internal team. And so their pain point that you might want to be hitting on is how their internal team just can't seem to hit on some of these, technical roles. Well, that message would not hit home with that medium-sized company that has a HR person in place, right? And so that's the key foundation is, well, I call it the relevant recruiter. So the key to becoming relevant, the first thing is knowing who you want to be relevant to. And then second, them viewing you as very clearly to see that. So then it starts to then you start to get into like, well, what does every other recruiter say? Well, I've got X amount of years of experience. I'm the industry expert in this niche. Like those things are not good enough anymore. So yeah, that should be a part of your plan. But ultimately what I do with people is like, once I understand my target market, then I start to go, okay, can I find 3 things that are unique about my process that I can then deliver? Experience can be a part of it. It just can't be all of it. Right.
Yeah.
But I think the thing and the take home here is think about benefits rather than features. And so oftentimes when people go to market and they start to differentiate themselves, they're like, oh, well, we'll just stay on this experience. Well, I have 30 years of experience. Okay. How does that benefit me? So that's a feature. It's like, I have 30 years of experience. It's like, no, I have 30 years of experience. So you can be assured that every candidate crosses your desk is somebody that's been completely vetted by somebody who's done this and viewed over 1,000 applicants. So what you're going to get is a very qualified candidate. Cool. So your experience means that I'm going to get qualified candidates and I don't have to waste my time. That's differentiation because I'm taking what I think is my feature and I make it what's in it for them. So those are some things that you can do. If you identify kind of 3 uniques in your marketplace, and at least 2 of those or one of those is very unique from the rest of your competitors, and we're explaining that story, that gives us something to work off of there. So
that's amazing. Even as I used to teach MPC training about how to go market a candidate to your client,
Yeah.
we did the same thing. It was literally about benefits. Don't give a number, give the why. And it comes down to, we oftentimes just speak and think our words hold impact when, I hate to go back to when I was 8. It's not what you say, it's how you say it in that process. My mother was right again, dang it. But it shows value today as we're marketing as well. So absolutely true. You've talked about content creation. I know this is also a part of your business. Content creation and marketing are becoming increasingly important, especially in our space. Recruiters, we're a little slow to get up on the marketing bandwagon.
Yep.
So what role does content really play in attracting and engaging your clients?
So content, going back in the differentiation, content is one of the best ways where you're like, okay, well, I can tell you I'm good, or I'll just show you. Okay. And so content is a big part of getting you to stand out and differentiate. But, what you're ultimately trying to do when it comes to attraction is, first and foremost, you have to have something that you're standing on. And so what I see a lot of people do with their content is like, okay, I know I need to get in the content game. Let me go ahead and share this article. Boom, bucket, check that box for the day, did my content. And it's like you're checking a box versus like, no, this is a strategy. Like, I'm fully into this. And so, I think focusing first and foremost is like, well, what is your mindset around the content? Okay. So like, if people follow me for a while, they understand that like I'm talking a lot about content that generates, leads. Now, I understand that that's what my goal is. But once I understand what that goal is, then I completely release from that. And I go, how do I now add value and share and showcase my leadership and connect with my audience in an authentic way, and doing that consistently? And so, what this allows you to do, like I said, is I can either tell you I'm different, I can show you how I'm different. And so that's really the biggest takeaway with content is like, I just posted this last week about how I helped one of my clients from one campaign generate a $236,000 pipeline. And so I can tell that story, I can add value, I can prove the success of my program, I can share and give people a glimpse of like what this individual was going through, and it builds connection. And then people, and your content's good when somebody goes, oh, he gets me, she gets me, they understand it. And that's what your goal with your content is. And that goes back into, well, how do I stand out? How do I differentiate? Well, I need to know my target market. Well, once I know my target market, it's very easily for me to say, hey, if you're an independent and boutique recruiting agency firm owner, are you tired of being on the revenue roller coaster where you have a ton of job orders and all of a sudden that gets pulled out from underneath you, but then you weren't able to stay consistent with business development because all your time, energy, and effort was focused on filling those roles? I can say that very clearly because that's my target market. I understand that pain. I understand that day in hell it's like I hear it all the time, right? And so my ability then to be able to showcase that, and then, oh, wow, that really resonates with me. And that's where you really start to attract, people. But one of the things I kind of slightly said this, and I want to drive this home really, is like, you got to plant a flag in the ground. You can't have a toe in the water with this stuff. You can't be like, well, I really like contingent search really works good, and RPO is good too, and retained's good. Which one of these would you like? It's like, no, if you're in retained, then you're dying on retained. And you're telling people all day long why contingency is not the way to go about it. Why? Because that's how you capture attention. Nobody attracted anybody by just being a part of the noise, right? You have to attract people, you need to believe in things that other people are going to believe in, and you carve out that. So a lot of that comes from having a mindset of abundance, is knowing like, hey, when I come out and say cold calling stinks, there's going to be a part of me that are just going to immediately go, I'm never listening to that guy ever because I've cold called my whole life. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'm fine with that. Because what I'm looking to capture is the person that goes, yeah, cold calling does suck and I want something different. Awesome. Now we're going somewhere, right? So be bold with your content efforts. And that's how we start attracting.
I love it. Hey, I'm a going against the grain kind of gal sometimes. I love it.
Yep.
You mentioned a while ago about automation. It's part of our industry. So automation and leveraging digital platforms can really streamline lead generation and outreach efforts. How can recruiting firms really incorporate technologies to help with these processes? Because it gets overwhelming. And we talked about it earlier. Everyone just wants the easy button and think that it's just going to happen, but it's a necessary evil. There's the human touch, but there's the automation. Talk to me about what that balance looks like.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic, in our industry. It's funny. I see people sometimes that'll like brag about how they grew their LinkedIn profile and they did it the right way. And, they did it the right way and they've all grown out this all organically, and like, kudos to them, but that's like bragging like that you just walked from LA to New York and the rest of us were on a jet plane. And that's what automation can do for people, right? Is we can basically take those that are walking and put them onto a jet plane to get them where they go faster. Now, that's all nice and sounds really good, but the key thing is having strategy, right? So there's excellent tools out there like Crelate that can help, but if we don't have a strategy that we're implementing, then we just have another shiny object that we've just chased after, right? And there's a lot of them out there. And so I think the first thing that when you look at automation, you need to get away from I think people think automation, the first thing they go to is like, well, what tool? No, ask yourself first, what strategy? What am I using this for? Am I using it for business development? Okay, perfect. So, well, what I don't want to do is I don't want to show up like everybody else that I've experienced on my LinkedIn, which is I'm going to connect with you and then I'm going to immediately get slapped with a pitch, right away. All right, I don't want to do that. I know I don't want to show up to it that way. I don't also want to, show up how other people have shown up, where it's like I get a random message about me growing my recruiting business on my LinkedIn and I don't even own a recruiting business. So that shows me you've done none of your research, right? So you mentioned before, and we talked a lot about this before, about the whole easy button. Automation just makes the job simpler. It doesn't necessarily make it easier. And so my clients that really win with automation, what they're doing differently is they have very, very incredibly targeted lists. And then they make sure that they have a very, very congruent message that's going to go with that very clean list. And then they make sure that they're not just selling. They make sure that they're focusing on the prospect and what's in it for the prospect. And by doing those three things, where it's targeted, targeted list, focused on the prospect, that's how we're able to generate more conversations. And we're strategically focused. We're not just like, oh, here's automation. There's 15 different emails to set up. Let's grab all those emails. We'll just run them through the spam thing and hopefully it works. And I think that's what a lot of this industry is, if I'm being honest, is you see it people all the time and people offering solutions like, oh, we'll set up your email. What does that look like? Oh, we're going to set up 5 different domains and we're going to guarantee you, one new client from this effort in a month. What they didn't tell you is how many bridges they're going to burn down along the way, right? And this is just one of those things where people don't know what they don't know. But a lot of it kind of goes back into what we were talking about earlier with like cold calling. Well, you can ruin your reputation with bad automation too. You can ruin your reputation through automation, LinkedIn, email, voice automation, it doesn't matter what it is. If you don't have the right strategy for it, then you might burn down more bridges, picking up that one win along the way. So it's really important to kind of start with that first. What's the outcome I'm after? What's the strategy? And then get really, really clean stuff from there to help you just move faster. So a lot of the things that I'm really excited about that I'm working with my clients on is we're doing very personalized stuff up front with automated sequences following up. And it's just lighting stuff on fire because people want the personalized, right? Nobody's going to argue that. Personalized doesn't keep you leveraged, but at least if you have follow-up that's leveraging, now you've got some good stuff, and we're doing personalized videos specifically to target clients or candidates. And then with automated follow-up, multi-channel LinkedIn email off of that, it's just awesome. So
I love it. Well, when working with people, I'm assuming, and working with organizations, you have to shift focus, and shifting to new approaches often comes with challenges and roadblocks. There's always those naysayers that say, no, it should be done this way. Mm-hmm. So what are some of those common obstacles that organizations or those BD organization, like the BD arm of an organization, face when trying to adopt new strategies? And how can they overcome them before they even start?
Yeah, I think first is shedding their old. Right. Sometimes we're so connected and so ingrained into our old strategies that, because it's what we know, we can't teach the new tricks sometimes. Right. So I think sometimes it's just, what is it that, what am I doing in the past? What am I saying goodbye to? What am I holding on to? And getting clarity on that first, I think is really, really powerful. But then I think from there, it's interesting because I'm going to bring this from a sales call I had this morning, which is, you have to be aligned with what you want, right? So I think there's always a place where you're going to do things, and especially if you're in a coaching program, like if you're in a coaching program and you're not uncomfortable, I don't think you're in the right one, because you're not truly expanding yourself, right? And a good coach should be expanding you, but it should also be expanding, and you should be wanting to be expanded in these areas, right? And so I think the expansion and the desire to actually change and knowing what you're going after is crucially important. And then from there, it becomes very much, how do I intentionally set up, my day for these new activities, and really understanding that, like, you're going to be creating something different, new. And so it's habits, skill set, mindset, right? Habits, skill set, mindset. What's the mindset about my new habit I'm going to create? What's the skill set I need to execute it? And if we're always doing those things and looking at it from that way, then that's how we, I personally help people kind of get on and adopt these new strategies. Is, hey, do we believe in it? Cool. We believe in it. Let's go all in. We're burning the boats, as Tony Robbins says, right? We're burning the boats. Now, we're going all in, skill set, mindset, habits. And then, that's how it'll usually build out a new system for somebody.
Adoption is hard and change is hard for people. So I love it. It's investing in all the stakeholders that have the process. I mean, heck, from our end, changing ATSs, that's a whole new bag of tricks. And I can only imagine just a process in that, that probably creates a lot of resistance to be like, well, the industry's changing, we need to change with it. And it's a whole new step. So obviously this is ever changing. The recruiting industry is ever changing, evolving. What new trends and best practices, that they are emerging every single day? I guess my question to you is, on the marketing end, how are you staying ahead of the curve? How do you maintain and make sure your methods are relevant and effective? Because you probably change, you turn the day, you change the covers, and it changes instantly. So talk to me about that.
Yeah. So this will go back. First, I'm going to start with some of the things we've already been talking about. Is a lot of marketing, a lot of what you see is just the next new shining object that's out there. And there's a lot of the same principles of marketing that were taught in the 1990s that are still very, very relevant to this day. Right. So what you see changing is the tactics. So for me personally, it's like I'm always working with a coach myself. I'm always staying up to date with other people. I think it's dishonest and, to be a coach and not be coached. So that's one of the things that helps me kind of stay ahead of the trends. Is I'm always working with somebody who's doing the same thing, looking at other marketing trends. Of course, I, look at other courses and information out there. I actually leverage AI and Chat GPT a lot for my own research. There's certain people that I follow on LinkedIn, for example, like, that are way more experts at the LinkedIn algorithm than I am. Cool. Well, I don't need to be the ultimate expert of LinkedIn algorithm. I'll go listen to these people and then I'll, go apply my strategies to that. So yeah, I think there's always a balance. Like, I think that you have to be looking ahead. Like you said, I mean, you wake up, you go to sleep, you wake up tomorrow, it'll be a whole different platform, a whole nother thing. I think the challenge is, like, before I start chasing that, shiny object, is, well, what's working, what's not already that I'm doing, but so much of marketing really comes down to psychology and human behavior. And that stuff doesn't change. People are always going to be driven to avoid fear, in their life. People are going to always, for example, want to keep up with the Joneses, whether they don't want to admit it or not. There's certain marketing psychological behaviors that will always be true. And that's the thing that I think, is where I kind of stay focused on, is like, all right, well, there might be a tweak on how we want to hook in somebody on LinkedIn. There might be a way that we want to change the way we're posting this video on LinkedIn. We might want to change our videos from being vertical to horizontal. We might want to go to those are all just things that we're paying attention to. And I've got a team that pays attention to that stuff, but we're reviewing analytics, from our own campaign performances and our client campaign performances, that we let the data kind of guide us towards things that we want to make, big edits on. But in terms of, like, just the market knowledge, I actually use a lot of Chat GPT and Google Gemini as my research. And if you haven't figured out those tools to really, like, support and help you with that stuff, I mean, there's just gold mines in there. So yeah, I mean, that's just some of the things that I'm doing.
I love it. And I feel like I'm being dishonest. Like some days I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to Claude today. The next day I'm gonna go to Gemini. I feel like I'm cheating on the AI product.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But absolutely using those tools just to get insight is huge in our industry too, especially the industry we serve. To think about how much you can scale another vertical, how quickly you can get access to your, information to your recruiters and your sales teams. Like if you are not using it, we did a 10 best cases used cases for ChatGPT in your organization, and it was a hit. Absolutely, people love that. So I love that you bring that up, and having a coach is huge. Of course, as an athlete, and I'm sure you probably that is stuck in our mind, but Tom Brady, being in his position, no one ever probably has accomplished what he's accomplished. But guess what? There are people to look at him in a different lens and give him guidance. So who are we to say that we shouldn't do that as well? I think it's the first step is admitting in any process of getting better. So I love that.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting kind of topic. I mean, coaching has really kind of hit the mainstream big over the last 5 years, right? And I think everybody has their own, kind of personality, right? I think some people are very open to coaching. I think some people I'm always show me and I'm all in on it, right? It's just kind of my personality. Then there's other people that are, I think, on the flip side of that, are very ego driven, which are like, hey, I want to figure this out on my own. I'm not saying that it's a knock. That's fine. And then there's others that are in between, which are like, yeah, you know what? I've been watching on the fence for a while. I think I'm going to go ahead and give that a thing. But if we're being honest, coaching is like recruiters. There's a lot of good ones and there's a lot that aren't, right? And so you have a negative experience and then that becomes your taste. And that's actually coming back into my relevant sales call from this morning. That's what she said. She's like, hey, I went through a program, a couple months back, saying, it wasn't the same. She's like, but similar, but I didn't see any of the results, that, I would hope to see, within your program. Right. So, she's also, what's going to be different. Right. And so that it's just, hey, a good coach is going to show up for you and ask you questions about your unique challenges and your unique things. And I think a lot of what people are experiencing out there is coming into somebody who's built their own system and then they force feed that on you rather than, I think one of the things I take pride in with the relevant recruiter method is it's a very specific methodology to follow, but it's all personally implemented for each one of my clients. Yeah. And that's what makes it really different. That's why we see such good results, with people that go through the program. So
I love it. I think it's amazing. If you've ever, I've said this 100 times. Even as an athlete, I was like, well, I can't throw my perfect game without criticism on my no-hitter. I always love a different insight. I love being challenged in a positive way as long as it's for growth.
Right.
So I think that's amazing that you're able to give that insight and in that collaborative relationship with your firms. So
I appreciate that.
I only have one last question. I've kept you quite a while today. We've had some quality time back to back. So I'm going to leave one more question for you. Looking ahead, what are your thoughts on the future of recruiting? And think about those firms and agencies positioning themselves to adapt to a potential industry disruptions or changes. What can they do? How can they prepare for those things coming in the future, if you can think of anything?
Yeah, I mean, I still believe the future of, the recruiting industry from where I sit is just a firm's ability, whether they're, an independent or a boutique or even a medium, your ability to dominate your digital space can make your job and your life easier on all aspects. So a lot of times with, when I say digital space, it's like your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your email, your YouTube, wherever you're at is really starting to dominate and build brands on these different channels. Because I think the thing that people naturally look at is well, if I spend time online, is it going to generate me a lead? Am I going to get business from this activity? And if you do it right, the answer is universal. Yeah, 100% it will. But there's also these other benefits that I don't think a lot of people really keep in mind, which is a lot of my clients, what they'll experience after they put together a system like this is, and this is why I say it's going all in on digital. It's not I think there's a lot of people that are playing in the water now, but this is a jump in, cannonball. And so what this will impact is your response rates from your outreach. Now, instead of just being a recruiter in their inbox, oh, you know what, Kortney, I've seen some of your stuff. They may not be able to exactly connect those dots, but there's some subconscious brand awareness that's going on. right? So it's a back and forth game that everybody thinks about, like content. Oh, I just want the inbound lead from the content. But it's like, no, if you go all in on this and your company's presence does, like I've got a firm that we work with down in Houston that like they have about 30 people we manage their brands for, and they absolutely kill it. And last year they had a banner year, they're doing north of 10 million. And they grew last year in an economy where most other companies, and not universally, but most other companies were struggling. Well, they are way far ahead in terms of what they're doing with their team. Their team is fully branded online. They have LinkedIn automation system setups. They still do cold calling. They still do a lot of the traditional things that recruiters do, but they're all in on digital. They're all in on driving their own brand narrative, and they're doing it at the individual level, which makes it really, really powerful. And if you're at that point where you have a team, think about how much value you're adding to your team now by giving them resources to make their job and do their job easier, better, more efficiently, but also even grow their brands. I don't care what you're doing. And this is my belief. If like you don't have a personal brand in 24, I don't care if you are the owner of a business or if you are, the sales manager, you have the ability in 2024 to drive your own narrative. And I don't care if I'm running a business or if I'm an employee, I'm going to control the heck out of that. And I'm going all in on it so that, hey, if it's just me advancing my career, awesome. I'm going to be in control of that. I'm going to be all in on that. If it's me growing my recruiting business, then awesome. I'm going to do that. If it's just me growing my role as a recruiter for the business I'm working with, because all of this at the end of the day can still come back as a personal benefit. And it also will benefit, the person I might personally be working for right now, which creates win-wins for all. So all in, not a toe in the water, all in on digital.
I think that's amazing. Great piece of advice. And all of those same things, even if it's personal or for your company, all seem to go hand in hand and a benefit to everybody. So,
yep.
Donnie, thank you so much for joining us today. Love this conversation. Love to hear different insights and how people can be successful outside of the norm that they've been dealing with over the past few years. So thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate you.
No, I appreciate being here. Appreciate the opportunity. It was a lot of fun.
And for our listeners, for those of you who may be interested, we'll include Donnie's LinkedIn profile and Relevant Recruiter website if you're interested in learning more. Absolutely an insightful and inspiring conversation from Donnie. He's truly the mastermind behind the Relevant Recruiter method. And we've really learned a lot about innovative approach, really, when it comes to lead generation, personal branding, positioning your recruiting firms as authorities in your respective markets. So from leveraging automation to digital presence to creating compelling content and implementing multi-platform strategies. Thank you so much, Donnie. I'm sure our audience has gained leaps and bounds from the knowledge that you shared with us today. So for everyone listening, thank you. And keep sharing your expertise. Our listeners definitely gained insights. Until next time, have a wonderful day.